First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 1 Corinthians, the 8th chapter. And, mainly in here, the Apostle Paul is addressing the topic of, foods offered unto idols. And really, he admonishes and warns those that were of a higher spiritual maturity in the church of Corinth to be mindful of the younger brethren, right? The ones that were more newly come in, given the atmosphere that they were in, those that were coming out of the world into the faith are not all on the same level, right? You have some that are of a weaker conscience, and those that are more mature that understand, meaning of certain things, like how, these idols are really, no gods, and really foods that you eat is not necessarily equated to you worshiping an idol, but certain liberties that you have in your Yahushai, which are granted through your deeper understanding of the Lord and of how to maneuver under the law of Yahushai, being mindful not to let that become a stumbling block onto the younger brethren. So Paul addresses that in here, right, and which bleeds into the 9th chapter a bit about just because you have certain rights or liberty, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily use it. Okay, that it's limited by your love for or your care for others, for the rest of the church. So this is 1 Corinthians 8:1. It says, "Now as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge." Right? So, we know concerning how, foods offered unto idols, what role that actually plays and how that actually affects us. But as the Apostle Paul is saying here, knowledge also can puff up, right? Having knowledge, whether on the relevance of idols or just in general in this truth, can if you're not careful, can make you high-minded. And that's what he means by to be puffed up. But charity edifieth, right? And in a nutshell, what he's saying is, knowing the truth or having a certain level of knowledge or wisdom or understanding it doesn't automatically make you righteous, okay? But rather how you use that, truth or that knowledge, matters. So concerning the building up of the church, it's going to be more in, when you go into that word charity, it goes into benevolence, hospitality, brotherly love. You got to consider those things above, right? Don't get high-minded because you have knowledge of certain things, because not all brethren are on the same level. And you have to be mindful of that. Verse 2, "And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know." See, so if you get ahead of yourself thinking that, you are, this super deep individual, or you've learned so much, you can get to the point where you feel like you pretty much like are a know-it-all. And that will actually cause you to overlook certain things, right? But understanding that concerning things you ought to know, really, you don't really know anything. So you're best off taking that humble route and continuing to learn. Verse 3, "But if any man love God, the same is known of him." Because you're not approved of the Lord just based on how much you know or your knowledge. There are a lot of people that have great knowledge, but are not in the right spirit, or their heart isn't in the right place. But those that love God, I believe there's a precept that says, let's see, he that is of, see if I can find it. Yeah, Sirach 19:24. "He that hath small understanding and feareth God is better than one that hath much wisdom and transgresseth the law of the Most High." See, so If you love the Lord, you may not be the smartest or have the most knowledge in the room, but you are going to do the things that are pleasing to the Lord out of the sincerity of your heart, and you are going to be known of the Lord, and that's really what matters. As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, because remember, in Corinth, you did have a lot of different temples, right, of different deities or idols, and the as we read in here, right, when we read in the first went through First Corinthians, the first chapter, I read from this article here, and there was a part in here that was mentioned in this second paragraph, right? It says here, the main temple of the actually, I'll start it here. It says, worship of false gods was a part of everyday life for those who dwelt in Corinth. The city was full of temples devoted to Greek deities, and later their Roman counterparts. Some of these temples were also proud centers of sexual immorality and expression. The main temple of the city was the temple that was devoted to Aphrodite, but it did not stand alone, as there were many other smaller temples throughout the city. It would be these temples where animals would be sacrificed and their meat sold in the markets. A quandary for the early church, right? Quandary, like in this sense, like a stumbling block of sorts to the early church. So Paul is addressing that situation now, right? So things offered unto idols, meats, all of those, we know that we all have knowledge. Oh, Salakia. Just I jumped back to the first. I meant verse 4. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. So he's saying, like, yeah, we understand that these idols, they're really nothing. If you really think about it, just like wood and stone, that is just people attribute these things to, but in actuality they're nothing. They're actually nothing. All right, and we know and understand that there's only one true living God. For though there be that are called gods, so even though there are some idols that are called gods and reverenced as such by people, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, right? There are a lot of Aphrodite, Zeus, Apollos, Mars, Ares, which is another name for Mars, all these different gods, right? Paul is saying there are many of these idols that are attributed the title of gods, but to us there is but one God. So we know there's only one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, right? So we know the only true living God is the Most High, and by him all things consist, including us, and one Lord, Yahushua HaMashiach, by whom are all things. So by whom all things were made, because the Lord made all things by the hand of Yahushua, and we by him, right? So we're here, and we gain life through Yahushua. We're established through Yahushua. Howbeit, however, there is not in every man that knowledge. So not everybody, like I mentioned before, not every brother or every believer is on that same level. Not all of them have that understanding. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol. So there are some believers that even till this very point in time, their minds or their conscience thinks or sees things that are offered unto idols, right? If you eat those things, their minds like liken it or equate it to, worshiping that idol to an extent, right? And their conscience being weak is defiled. So it messes with their head, especially, some that came from idolatry. So the Apostle Paul is warning or cautioning here, be mindful that not every brother is on the same level. There's some that may see this and it may mess them up. But meat commendeth us not to God. So it's not what you eat or food that, makes you approved unto the Lord. For neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. See, so you're not any better for eating it or not eating it. It doesn't make you better if you eat it, doesn't make you worse if you don't. Food is food, lawfully, obviously. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. And this liberty is through, once again, the knowledge that not every believer has, meaning on that level. Some that are weak, that are newly come in, do not have the same level of discernment or understanding as some that are more seasoned. So those that are seasoned, that have the liberty, that may be able to eat these foods, but in their minds they know that they're praying to Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai. They're not eating it in the name of an idol, and they're not dedicating it to an idol. So they know it's just food at the end of the day. To one who is weaker of mind or conscience might not see or understand it as such. So you have to be very mindful, lest that be an occasion to cause them to stumble spiritually and trip them up. Verse 10, for if any man see thee, which has knowledge, sit at meat in an idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? So if one, as it says, sees you, who you're more seasoned, so you know what you're doing, and you know you're not there to worship an idol, right? But maybe just for the food, or you're buying something. But shall not the conscience of him that is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? So they'll see that and they might think, okay, well, if he's doing it, then maybe I can do it, or maybe it's not so bad. But as he goes on to explain in verse 11, and through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Hamashiach died. Now, the perish here doesn't mean they're just going to like burst into flames, but it's more like like a spiritual ruin, right? Or being, their faith being damaged, or them being confused, or it might even be a stumbling block to drift them back into idol worship, because their conscience is going to tell them, right, having come into the faith, that no, that's wrong. You got to stay completely away from it, right? But seeing somebody that believes the same thing, that may be more seasoned, in a setting that looks like they're partaking of it, or they're, maybe it's not so bad, it may cause this individual to do this thing or eat of it, but in their minds, it's going against their conscience. Because in their minds, they're like, remember, Paul mentioned, some of them see this as actually worshiping an idol. But they're saying, but damn, but this brother did it, so I guess maybe it's not so bad, but I'm eating it, but I still feel like, damn, like it's messing me up. It's creating this conflict, this internal conflict, which can actually, open up the door for demons to mess with this brother's mind and think maybe I am going off. Or maybe they might go the other route and think, you know what, maybe I can do this, eat the foods offered unto idols, and then draw them right back into idolatry, right? But it's a very slippery slope, and you want to be very careful. So, as he says here, let me actually see what it says in the NLT on this verse. Yeah, it says, and when you sin against other believers by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, and this doesn't mean you're going to go tell them, hey, brother, come and do this. But when they see you, a more seasoned brother, they might think, oh, well, he knows what he's doing. So if he's doing it, then it's fine. And that's the encouragement. But in the back of their minds, they're like, but if, like, is this really okay? Because they're not on the spiritual level yet to understand or discern that, you know what? You're not eating this in worship of an idol, because these idols are really nothing anyway. So finishing off, it says here, by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, you are sinning against Hamashiach. Because you are, through your liberty and not being mindful of them, are becoming a stumbling block onto them, when really you should be doing everything in your power to strengthen them. So verse 13, that Paul concludes with this, wherefore if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. See, so he's saying here, if eating whatever it is gonna cause or be a stumbling block to my brother, right, and mess up his walk, or mess him up in the faith, or cause him to go off because he doesn't fully understand, then I'm not gonna eat any meat at all, for the sake that he can be on the right path, that he doesn't get the wrong idea and be encouraged in the wrong way to throw off his faith. So all in all, Paul is saying here, yes, you have liberty. Yes, some of you are more seasoned. Yes, you understand, you understand what this actually means and how to maneuver in it, and that gives you liberty in Yahushai. But be mindful in how you express that liberty, especially around those that have not the same level of understanding, lest you inadvertently be a stumbling block to another brother's faith. And that brings us to the end of the book of 1 Corinthians, the 8th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.